All right, Sonny, thank you so much for that very warm welcome. Thanks everyone for making it out this evening. We're glad to see you all. Some of you came to the initial rollout for a Better Billion, so this talk is going to be a little bit different than that one. This is going to get more into the methodology of how we did it than the previous one, which was more about what we did and what we were sort of working towards. A Better Billion is, well, scroll. Oh. Okay. All right, we're gonna hang on. Next slide. All right, a Better Billion sort of asked the pretty fundamental question, which is the mayor has this ambitious agenda to deliver improved transit across the city, and his big idea was making the buses both fast and free. And making the buses free is an expensive proposition. Give or take $1 billion a year. That's the number we came up with. It's the MTA's number. And if you look at the pilot program that City Hall proposed to make the buses free during the 5 weeks of the World Cup, that was going to cost about $100 million, and $100 million over 5 weeks is $1 billion over 50 weeks and 50 weeks in a year. And so here we go. So the question becomes, $1 billion is a lot of money, but free buses is not just one outlay of $1 billion. Free buses is an outlay of $1 billion every year, time immemorial. So if you were to take that $1 billion a year and set it up against a calendar, so it's $5 billion over 5 and $10 billion over 10 and $20 billion over 20, if you were to think of it in terms of a capital program, what would you be able to deliver for $1 billion a year, or 30 billion over 30 years, or 40 billion over 40 years, which is the time frame that we came up with? And the answer is the biggest subway expansion the city has seen in 100 years. We're talking about completing the 2nd Avenue subway. We're talking about finally extending the N to LaGuardia, extending the 6 to Co-op City, extending the 7 out to Whitestone, building a whole new line, express line that would deliver service for the first time into far eastern Queens, along the Long Island Expressway, relieving the massive capacity constraints on the Queens Boulevard line by reactivating the old Long Island Railroad tracks program that Franklin's been involved with for a long time, called the QueensLink proposal, plus delivering better subway service by flipping over a branch of the LIRR that serves Laurelton, finally building the Utica subway, and that's the program. It is large. It is 41 new miles of subway route. It is 64 new subway stations. And sort of the crux of this is that's a lot of transit that you can buy for $40 billion, but it unlocks a second very powerful aspect of planning, which is high capacity transit allows you to deliver high capacity housing. And this is a city with a dire housing crisis. And we think that building all of the subway would allow the city to potentially unlock 167,000 new housing units based on existing zoning, because there's a lot of zoning in the city we can't use effectively because the amount of transportation we can get out there is just simply not sufficient. Each line that we designed had to deliver 2 things. 1, it had to make transit better for bus riders. 2, it had to deliver housing. Some delivered a lot of benefit to bus riders and just a little housing. Some delivered a lot of housing and not a lot of benefit to bus riders, but each line had to tick each of those boxes in some way. And the second thing that we did as we shaped this program is it had to fit 2 overall constraints, one of which is we had to be able to point to real world examples of similar projects being built like this in sort of the broader context, hopefully here in New York, that we could source back to, or North America, or sort of last resort, Europe. Places with high labor costs like we have here, places with tough environmental laws like we have here, real apples to apples comparisons. And then 2, we weren't just anyone can propose a line that goes anywhere and does anything, but we made sure that it had to fit within the resource envelope. So if it cost more to build, so when we built the program, we organized it into 10-year segments. Each segment cost about $10 billion. We estimated a federal match, so on and so forth. But basically the idea was if we could not fit it in the resource envelope of the decade, it did not work. So we came up with a bunch of great ideas. We'll talk about some of them in a second. There were 30 or 40 or $50 billion ideas, which is great, but you only have $40 billion. And if you put all 40 billion of that over 40 years into that singular project, you've delivered one thing, right? And nobody wants to spend $40 billion delivering one thing. So what we were trying to do was develop a cohesive set of proposals that serve the entire city and do it within the double constraints of one, real world examples, and two, fitting it into the available resource envelope. We built functionally a capital program. And Franklin's going to talk you through a little bit more about what didn't make it in, just to sort of underscore what we're talking.
So in online discussions and previous events, we got a lot of questions about what did not make it into the program. And based on the framework that Nolan has discussed just now, I'm going to talk about some of the things that we were thinking about during this 6-month-long process of making a better billion happen. So first of it is all the tunnels and bridge proposals that are often in the zeitgeist of transit discourse. For example, Financial District in downtown Brooklyn via Pierpont Street, and a new Queens Manhattan connection, either into Harlem or into Midtown. And building on top of that, we removed all future Interborough Express extensions that might need to go over a river. That includes both the Harlem River Tunnel and then the bridge into from Randall Island into Harlem, and also a potential extension into Staten Island. And based on where airport traffic flows on public transit towards LaGuardia, we replaced the IBX extension into LaGuardia with the N-train extension. Also, because of the resource constraints in the form of the budget, and also trying to cover as much of the city as possible, we also removed the consideration for our 3rd Avenue line in the Bronx. Because of that alignment parallels the existing Metro North service too much. And the walksheds are very similar in the sense of the line has already been there. And for the transit system to serve that part of the Bronx neighborhood, fare reforms and a better city ticket would serve them better than a massive capital project like the 3rd Avenue line. Other project that did not make it includes a 7-train extension to College Park and Whitestone. Initially, we thought that the 7-train can be turned up northwards on Parsons from its downtown terminus in downtown Flushing. Then we look at the Google Maps and determine that it's going to be too expensive to acquire all the properties in downtown Flushing. And later in December, when all the projects has been finalized, we found a different alignment sketched out from Google Maps. You can see here that branches off at Metz Willis Point. We call it internally the A-train. Here, actually, it's a part of land that Andrew, who's also worked on part of the project, told me that the MTA already owns this part of the land. So that makes the extension feasible, but it was too late into development, and we were not making further changes in December when the entire project was ready to be presented and released to the public. Other 7-train extensions that we did not consider are further extensions of the 7-train on the west side, including connecting it to the L. And the other reason that it is not considered is because both of these extensions will be prohibitively expensive and does not significantly impact bus service quality on the west side in Manhattan. And in a similar vein, the 2 and 3 extension down Nostrand was not considered in favor of building out the entire Utica Avenue line within the project due to a much better coverage of existing subway deserts. And separately, early in the planning, we had an entire program of rebuilding the entire Williamsburg and Jamaica lines segments, where we wanted to not entirely replace Jamaica line, but revamp the line into some sort of tunnel and viaduct sort of hybrid mode, where the South 4th Street tunnel can enter the Williamsburg section and have the V train, which is originally part of the Utica Avenue conversion into part of the B division into Williamsburg, and then rebuild the Jamaica line to have a transfer to the G. And then that program also included some stop consolidation and alignment changes on the J east of Broadway Junction. And it also included a platform extension program. And later we decided to remove this entire program out of the consideration because platform extensions doesn't necessarily count as new stations and does not incur housing development. And this entire Jamaica and Williamsburg line reconstruction and the projects that comes along with it are dropped for other projects. And as you can see here, we actually burned through a lot of different ideas, and Andrew actually created these maps that during the process, we were looking at how the overall map would look like if we eventually decided to release this version of the track map to the public. And there are also some projects that almost did not make it, which includes, hold on, arrows? Okay. Yeah, okay. Which includes the Cross Bronx Express. Initially, we wanted the 3rd Avenue L to be part of the Bronx program, and later we decided an east-west connection is better for the borough in terms of new build. The IBX extension to Astoria almost did not make it because of originally it was a much bigger expansion of the IBX line going to Harlem and going to LaGuardia, but later we were able to fit it into the 4th decade project along the N train to LaGuardia. The F extension and E extension were also overlooked early on because we were looking at a much bigger budget of federal dollars and local match. We were thinking about 50-50 instead of a 70-30 split. And these smaller projects were also easily overlooked because we had a much larger budget in the early planning stages. And when the budget got cut down, we found out that not only these are much better projects to propose, but also they yield significant housing production encouragement. And also 2nd Avenue's phases 3 and 4 were also a pain point of whether we should include it in this project. But I always love to say that 2nd Avenue phases 3 and 4 is the vampire that you invite in once you have enough silver bullets. And later, when we did the housing calculations, we found that 2nd Avenue phases 3 and 4 alone could bring about 15,000 new apartments in Manhattan, which for the borough is one of the more transformative housing development projects that it could incur under the current City of Yes zoning reforms. And just in the spirit of data, we used the network shapefiles, station data sets to build on these existing assets to produce the story map, of which you can see online. And Esri made it possible that despite their limited flexibility, that a better billion as a story map can be viewed on both phones, tablets, and computers alike. This project also would not be possible without New York City Department of City Planning and also the New York City open data portals that we were able to deduce are largely conservative, but also significant housing production creation numbers. And then I would like to talk about the maps, which you guys probably came here for. As you may know, this is a version of the map where you see in the story maps. This is the map where the interlining, partial interlining of the DeKalb did not happen. And we also put both the W and the V on the LIE to illustrate that connecting the LIE to both Broadway and 2nd Avenue works. But we also had a version on this side where we did a full deinterlining of the DeKalb Junction to make sure that trains run faster in this junction heading to Manhattan. And also there's only one service on the side of Long Island Expressway. And this, we actually plan out the frequency based on the headrooms offered by CBTC. For example, Broadway should run 30 trains per hour on a pair of double tracks, same idea with 2nd Avenue. And the DeKalb Junction should be fully deinterlined so that 6th Avenue service and Broadway service does not interact with each other at DeKalb. But we got some internal feedback that people might be confused as to why are the bullets going in the wrong direction as reality. and we realized that the interlining isn't a major focus point of our planning project, and we quickly produced a version that is more familiar to the current maps. And also, there are different iterations based on the current maps, of which to show to the press what are the projects actually proposed. We had this grayed out version of the existing network, and to see what kind of additions would appear. So this is the first iteration, and this was the other one that we used in a different presentation before. And as you can see, the entire network now have a more densely network shape instead of a radio and core radio shape, due to the addition of QueensLink, IBX, and other radio lines such as LIE and the ENNF extensions, also the cross Bronx. And I would like to use the maps as an example of the ones that we were using based on the maps we've drawn previously to give our guests during the March 4th presentation an example of adaptive reuse based on the orientation of where the LIE is going via the 63rd Street Tunnel and going south from the QBL, geographically speaking, on a more abstract way. And before our first event in March, we actually produced a longer poster size map and wanted to see how much would it cost for us to have NYU repro to print out like 100 or 150 of these foldable maps, similar to the size that you would get from an MTA customer service center. And we asked about the quotes, and it was about $2,400. So this remained electronic file instead of something actually in print. But by making this map, I was able to really stretch the entire map out, and it made it easier to show where Manhattan's dense subway coverage is, and how the rest of the network stretches its legs beyond the previous formats, where to fit it on a PowerPoint, Midtown Manhattan has to be squished, and there's a lot of empty space unused near Williamsburg and on the Jamaica lines. So in terms of the cost estimation methods, we didn't get a lot of flack in terms of like how much would it cost. Instead, we got a lot of questions about how we were able to reduce the cost versus some official estimates, such as Second Avenue phases 3 and 4, Utica, and other projects. So we assume all the costs in constant $20-$25 because it is way too hard to project inflation, as we all currently live in right now. We used tunnel boring machines for all the tunnels between stations in A Better Billions projects. And as past transit cost projects, research have shown the stations are actually the largest cost drivers of MTA projects. So we avoided mine stations as much as possible and costed out all the stations as cut and cover when possible, but with the exception of Second Avenue. Second Avenue being in central New York, being a part of Manhattan, cut and cover stations are not exactly a good idea to propose to, and we were trying to be realistic in terms of the cost for Second Avenue phases 3 and 4, and we costed out most of the stations on phases 3 for as mine stations. But there's actually one station that is also we propose as cut and cover because of the wide right of way at Park Row, where the Chatham Square station is located. Overall, we built 3 cost models. So the low is global average based on non-Anglosphere and Asian and other European costs. The mid is based on the reformed New York City MTA costs that we are currently seeing for Second Avenue Phase 2 by and large. And the high cost model is Second Avenue Phase 1, where the tunnel and the stations are very expensive. And and A Better Billion in the story map uses the mid cost model to present the price tag for each project. So, and this chart shows the difference between the high costs, low costs, and the different forms of construction: tunnel, underwater tunnel, trench, elevated and stations cut and cover, or stations mined, or stations elevated. And you can see there's a stark difference between the medium cost that we have penciled in, and also the low cost that is the global average. We were using mid cost because we were trying to be realistic in terms of what the city can do under current cost structures, and we weren't trying to propose a myriad of additional projects because we were thinking about how overnight New York City can be as cost effective as the global average. And in terms of the media reception, it's generally positive. We actually got a lot of different coverages from different media outlets, including New York Times, and Bloomberg City Labs, and AM New York. And what we didn't like initially is how, despite having a significant housing component, where around 25% of the overall story map length we dedicated to housing, and how we claim in a very neutral language on how subway is always the growth driver for housing production, that the media reception initially, especially in this first wave, pitches in and focus on the debate between free buses and subway construction. And we can't blame me either, because it's about taking the non-existent money from non-existent free bus program and propose that we build the program into funding the subways. And that is also a very indicative of why the current transit discourse is focused on why not both, or why can't we do much more things than we are actually doing. And also the other media receptions includes some podcast, expanding subways. There's a Spectrum One news report, and also Streets blog was did us a favor of putting in Mayor Mamdani's previous media assets with the Cross Bronx Express line. There are also other forms of media reception beyond just the traditional coverages, where some of the transit crowd and also the transit advocacy group were interested in covering this topic, some in support and others in objection. But what we ultimately feel is that this is the kind of media discourse that is needed, in which people are actually thinking about how municipal involvement in transit planning has been missing in New York City subway for a while. The city used to build subways, and the city used to plan for subways, but it hasn't been doing that for a while. And we'd hope that with this project, we could suggest this to the lawmakers, the policymakers, to say that the city can be involved in subway construction yet again. And there's enough ideas of a funding or ideas of a funding pipeline to support the MTA's capital program, which is right now 90% state of good repair and not enough capital expansion, which is also separate to its operational plans. And so lastly, to the major takeaways, how we present our planning programs matter. You cannot engage just regular New Yorkers who are not well-versed in transit by sketching out a general idea and post it on a website, hoping that it will gather attention from people who are not interested in transit expansion. The message must be simplified, and to our point, a bit too oversimplified, because the first wave media coverage were focused on the free bus versus subway expansion debate. And as this exercise has shown, the transit planning, by and large, has also remained decoupled from housing expansion program. In the common imagination, people were always thinking about how to have both free buses and subway expansion, instead of having both subway expansion and expanded housing program. And then the other takeaways are the problem of why not both, and also this, personally, I would believe a very hostile pitching of spending money on buses and spending money on trains, in the similar vein of the rails to trails or rails and trails debate that is near and dear to my heart, because I did my master's capstone on QueensLink. and also the idea of operational budget versus capital budget concepts that is not so clear with the average New Yorker in terms of how the MTA has already been receiving so much money from both state and municipal contributions. And what we're proposing is basically throwing money at the problem, and this group who are not aware of the difference between capital budget and operational budget does not like it. So I think, do we have time for questions, or should we leave it for later?
We do have time for questions.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. That's all for our presentation. Yeah.
Hi, thanks. Great presentation. I'm just curious if you have gotten any feedback from the MTA or the state of the mayor regarding this project?
The MTA chairman has referenced it in public appearances. No. Well, the state employs Jano.
So we had someone sending us a video about how Jano is using our
Has
used our the NYU's public press release of A Better Billion to tell their vendors about how subway expansion is good for the city. That's something.
So yeah, I mean, it's no, these aren't discussions that happen in public. People have to find, it's a big, ambitious program. It would cost $1 billion a year, asking people to support tax hikes. Even a tax hike for this in this environment would not be easy, but there is interest in thinking about ways to grow the subway network again. We're thrilled that people have, sort of latched onto the idea of the subway network is a thing that we should not treat as static, that should grow once more. And I think there's interest in that from a lot of different quarters, but how that formalizes itself is yet to be seen. In some ways, we're just the academics, and now it's up to the politicians to sort of look at the work and make the call about what interests them and what doesn't.
Hi, thanks so much for the presentation and great report. I was wondering, speaking to the kind of confusion with operating and capital budget.
Yeah.
Did you assume $1 billion a year of debt servicing, or in terms of total capital costs?
PAYGO.
Okay, so like the capital costs.
Yeah, the idea is, it's not going to all sort of roll out at front, but at $1 billion a year, you have enough to expand the subway system without incurring mountains of debt for the first time since the Second World War.
Okay, so you assumed it was like kind of a similar apples to apples of like expense on a bus subsidy and a...
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then just a quick question on, is there any like technical incompatibility or precedent for boring and then cut and cover station?
No.
It's...
Yes.
Okay.
It's how they do it in Paris. It's how they do it in Los Angeles. And I think the other thing that's worth pointing out is a lot of the stations we're proposing aren't bored or dug. So like the entirety of the Long Island Expressway line that we proposed is basically either at grade or above grade, running along the freeway median. So that's one reason we're able to deliver like 15 new miles for, what was it, $6 billion? Yeah, $7 billion. So we did everything we could to dig as little as possible, because there's no way to get around the fact that digging in New York City is an expensive proposition,
It's on?
Yeah.
Yeah. Franklin briefly mentioned interlining, but we didn't really get into it yet.
No.
I was curious about all the new interlining with Second Ave and what you thought that would mean for frequency.
So I think it means good thing. I mean, de-interlining, to sort of wander off on a tangent, I was up at the City College Archives yesterday, and I found a giant memo that was written by city planning to what was still the very young MTA about de-interlining the system in 1970. as a way to deliver more capacity and fix crowding. The other piece of it is that there is extensive ridership research that shows that riders penalize waiting and transferring at extraordinarily high rates as compared to simply time spent on trip, if that makes sense. So like riders think of it in terms of like, depending on the methodology you use, something like it can be as bad as 3 or 4 minutes per minute spent waiting for a train at a transfer is the penalty. So by running lots of services, lots of places all on top of each other, you can reduce that penalty significantly. So it's not the trade-off. There are trade-offs to de-interlining. And the second piece of this is so our cardinal rule was no new tunnels under the rivers, because we have no good examples of that in the city. I mean, we found one in Hong Kong, and that was expensive, and we found one for what would become the Elizabeth Line in London, but the Thames is a much different river than the Hudson or the East River for that matter. So you can see that we sort of were left with sort of two things. One, we have a 63rd Street tunnel that has the M running through it, which never does more than 6 or 7 trains an hour. The tunnel can handle 30. So why not put the tunnel to use, right? I've got 23 slots to play with. So by driving 23 slots worth of trains down the LIE, right? So that's right. So you're sort of, it becomes a balancing act, right? In the same way that like through running at Penn Station is a balancing act, if we were to do it. Another topic entirely. But all right, so this is 2 tracks. This can handle 30 trains an hour. It's plugging into a tunnel. Sorry, right here, tunnel. Long day. It's plugging into a tunnel right here that only has 7 trains an hour moving through it, right? So I can potentially put 23 more trains an hour through there, right? That leaves me 7 trains left over here. And because the N doesn't run with great frequency to Astoria, I've got slots I can play with there. So what we were trying to do is use, because the frequency argument is real, but is to look at every new segment of system, and that when we were drawing this, making sure that we were exploiting to the maximum extent possible the existent infrastructure. So like when they built the 63rd Street tunnel, they built it with bell mouths to connect to the 2nd Avenue subway. And they built it with bell mouths to connect to, I think, both the 6th and the Broadway lines, right? So the infrastructure is already there, and it's already grade separated. So a lot of the pain points that people think about when they think about, interlining headaches, the things that break, Nostrand, which ruins commutes on the 2 and the 3 and the 4 and the 5 all the time, were not designed with this sort of level of separation in mind, if that makes sense. So the combination of good design and technology takes a lot of the bite out of the interlining versus de-interlining debate. And the second piece of it is like, if a new tunnel is a $15 billion enterprise, you've just lost 1/4 of your programs in pursuit of, 1 line per line purity, right? So like there's a huge benefits trade-off that you have to get through.
We going on time? Okay.
You mentioned that the 3rd Avenue line in the Bronx was cut because Metro North so closely paralleled it. But you didn't take into account similar stuff in Queens, like blur modernization, fare integration, that affects crowding levels on the current subway and affects where you can build new extensions, like Jamaica Yard, for example. Why was the Bronx different than Queens?
The Bronx was different than Queens because we could come up with a very compelling cross Bronx case that we thought delivered far more benefit than the 3rd Avenue line would. The cost benefit analysis can't be conducted in a vacuum. So we don't propose fare integration. We also don't propose a 3rd Avenue line. We don't propose fare integration between the city and the LIRR. We do propose taking pieces of the LIRR infrastructure and flipping them over to transit. But we don't touch the fare equalization debate. One way to get more people into downtown Brooklyn, for instance, would be to finally do something with the Atlantic branch, which I would be a big fan of because I hate waiting for the train and I hate changing at Jamaica. But we don't touch that either because it's outside of the ball of wax.
But Frank.
Yeah, and also the reason we did not pursue a I should have put that on the PowerPoint. Yes, we also looked at a Jewel Avenue extension very early on. It was actually the first day. We were looking at a better billion. The reason we don't want to extend anything from the Jamaica Yard on a planning perspective, in lieu of any of the operational headaches that the TA operational guys would give us, is that having a local line on Jewel Avenue versus a direct express line into 63rd means that you are transferring, everybody is transferring at Forest Hills because of the perceived benefits of having an express line entering the station during rush hours. And we are also not thinking about further reactivation of some certain LR assets such as Lower Montauk because of freight concerns and also other commuter rail related things because we have a different program for that.
And budget.
And budget constraints. And also LIE serves a part of Queens where there is no existing LR service. And it can be delivered for very cheap, $7 billion for 15 miles in New York City on an elevated alignment where most of the alignment is already owned by a public entity. So DOT, MTA, LR. Yeah. And that's why in terms of the repurposing and the choosing projects debate, we decided to mainly steer far away from the commuter rails, unless there were previous plans, such as the E extension to Lorton, of which is a 50-year-old report.
Yeah, and just to sort of circle back on that, I mean, one of the things, the subway built the Bronx, and unfortunately, the car ended up building a lot of Queens. So one of the things we were really looking to do was to drive transit service into places where people either have to depend on buses or have to own cars as a way to attack the cost of living in the city. And as is current, there are 2 trunk lines in Queens. And there's
3 and 4.
The 6, the IND, you have the 1, you have the 2 and the 5, and you have the 6. I mean, like the Bronx has a lot of north-south service already. So what we were trying to do was we were trying to correct the biggest deficiency that we saw in the Bronx transit network, which was a lack of a good rapid east-west service, which we think we did. And that just was a more compelling case than spending billions of dollars to build a line that is like literally 100 feet from Metro North tracks.
Yeah.
Do you have any projects from around the world that you think are really well done that were sort of an inspiration for what you guys are trying to do?
In terms of planning or in terms of...
I guess execution, like who's doing what you want to do really well currently?
Like, honestly, Paris for Cross Bronx and trying to convince the lawmakers that east-west rapid transit connection with automated trains is a good idea. We also use the REM as an example just to let people off more geopolitical examples. Personally, I did not have certain model or exemplar cities to look after for the overall conception of this program because it is inherently a New York-centric, New York-focused program that shoehorning any other cities' existing conditions and their planning philosophies onto New York City is not exactly a great practice, in my opinion. And what you can see here and are the projects that we mostly are dusting off old archives records. For example, E extension, F extension, LIE in some certain shape or form, Utica, QueensLink, and also the N-train extension to LaGuardia are all projects that has been in the ideology locally for a while. We are just re-emphasizing the need for them and doing the actual math of how much housing they can bring if these beloved or highly debated projects are actually realized. So we are doing this extra step of telling the public, whoever might be interested in these kind of projects, to say that, hey, look, not only you can get the trains here, but also you can build this amount of houses without going through another lengthy discussion about zoning reforms. We were all obviously advocate for further upzoning, but these are the projects that can bring a lot of housing based on existing zoning.
Thank you.
Hello. Did you consider any sort of extensions that, for example, went into Jersey, Westchester, Long Island? I think you said you considered and cut like a Staten Island tunnel because of the tunnel consideration.
Yeah.
But or was there sort of a emphasis on not kind of stepping into that jurisdictional debate?
If it's not in the 5 boroughs, no.
Okay.
We're very parochial like that.
Fair enough.
There actually is a lot of history to that, where in the 50s, New York State passed legislation that would have created a joint operating district to run what was the H&M and expand it into a full sort of loop service from Hudson north and south into Manhattan north and south, because everyone had a loop on the brain. Jersey never passed the legislation. So I think there's a pretty long history of New York being fairly interested in doing stuff with Jersey, but and Jersey sometimes being interested in doing stuff with us, but we can't. To bring Jersey politics into this is no.
And just look at how long we are spending time on building the next pair of tunnels into New York City.
Yeah,
for Gateway, and like we want
before that, which sort of gets to Jersey politics, right? Like
that's why we didn't want to touch about these sort of interstate connections at all.
Makes sense. Relatedly, I guess I did want to ask, you had mentioned there weren't good examples of, tunnel construction, but I was curious if you had considered the Gateway budget when it came to rough cost estimates for that.
16 billion.
Yeah, the tunnel piece is 13.
Yeah,
so
because I know there's like Portal Bridge and all these other ancillary things too.
The Hudson is a very tough thing to dig under. The conditions in the East River are probably far more favorable. Unfortunately, the last big East River tunnel project was a disaster in its own right, the 63rd Street tunnel, in a litany of ways. I don't know that anyone has any true convincing accounting of how much that tunnel actually cost in the end. So you're sort of left pulling from, well, do you want to go to the Bay Area and pull, because the Bay is basically a giant tidal basin, and it's sort of the same way that the East River is kind of a giant tidal basin. Like, do you go, but that's 60 years ago. And like, at some point it's just, you could get anything that's 60 years old and try to adjust for inflation, but then you run into all sorts of things like, well, federal procurement laws mean that if you get matching federal money, all the steel has to come from the United States, but we don't make a lot of steel here anymore, but we did make a lot of steel in the 1960s. And so you just start running into wall after wall after wall. And at some point there just aren't good comparisons. We think there are ways to do it. I hope there are ways to do projects like the Hudson Tunnel project cheaper, because we need those projects. I can't with confidence say that there are, because I haven't looked at it, so we can't, maybe there's a Hudson Tunnel cost project to be done at some point, but that wasn't this either. So we just, there's so much to do without opening that can of worms.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah.
If you were to do, I'll make it quick. If you could do power rankings here, let's say you only have a quarter of this money to spend, or I guess I'm just curious, what are the most effective dollars here as far as which lines are being built? And I guess measured in housing would be
measured in housing or measured in bus riders helped?
I guess
you're
both.
Putting me on the spot.
No, I think, I guess housing is the main metric is probably.
I think my two favorites are, how much money do I have?
15, let's say.
15. Can I get a bonus for Manhattan?
Sure.
Okay, great. So, Second Avenue subway, the Long Island Expressway, and the Utica would be my 3.
Yeah.
Hillside would be 4. It's got 200,000 bus riders a day. Those would be my 3.
So I already got asked this question too, and I reply Second Avenue last time in March, and I will still reply Second Avenue. But since you said 15 billion, then I hope we can squeeze Cross Bronx and Second Avenue in there.
Cool. Great. We'll do one. Well, let's do two more questions.
Regarding the cut and cover stations, like what were the last cut and cover stations that were done here in New York? And is there other examples in the US where they've done cut and cover recently successfully?
Yeah, LA. LA's are all cut and cover. They have a station cost problem too, and their station cost problem looks a lot like ours in that the stations are
Head houses, back of space.
yeah, so they've got station platform to station box size ratios, if that makes sense, that are even worse than ours for reasons that don't make a ton of sense. But all of their stations are cut and cover. Archer was cut and cover, and Roosevelt Island was cut and cover too, because it's at the top of because the transit tracks are on the top level and the LIRR tracks are on the bottom level. What other recent cut and covers have we done?
106th Street, actually.
Oh yeah, 106th Street. There we go. Well, the one that they're building next year is going to be cut and cover. They're blowing out the existing old Second Avenue tunnel structure and putting the new station in the tunnel that got built in the 70s before the whole thing got shut down.
And
96th Street, yes, which is huge. But yes, also cut and cover.
And just to add on that, cut and cover is actually the prevalent station construction method around the world for stations because of how it's actually much more simpler to build for stations. The moment you said you cannot have surface disruption, everything gets a lot more expensive. One of the reference literature would be how the MTA replied to the FTA about how they plan to mitigate for surface disruption as a requirement for NEPA for Second Avenue Phase 2, because they want to put 116th Street to less surface disruption, reducing the amount of openings they're cutting on Second Avenue, and thereby the cost has changed in terms of in their calculations. So putting cut and cover isn't necessarily like a cost cutting move. It's more of like going back to the norm of how transit is built for for New York City and the rest of the world.
Yeah, there's some places where you can't do it for a whole host of reasons. You know, the Elizabeth line doesn't really follow a street grid, for instance. So you have to so they went deep. And once you get deeper, then the federal literature on this in the 60s was actually pretty explicit. Once you get deeper than about 40 or 50 feet, the cost benefit analysis changes. But the thing about mining stations is every square foot hurts a lot more than it does with cut and cover. So it's sort of it's a sort of three-dimensional,
volume excavation.
Yeah. I mean, it's sort of like, you have to move every inch of dirt you move costs more. And so when you are doing it from underground and you can't just pull it out, it makes everything vastly more complicated because you're having to sort of take it and then move it a long ways if you're mining because you don't have a surface point.
Yeah, I got a quick one. With this many more stations and trains in the system, would there be room in the train yards for the trains?
We did. Would there be room in the? I mean, that seems like a good problem to have.
It is like suffering from success if the MT actually gets funded with this kind of project because federal funding allows you to spend money on yards as part of the operational plans for a certain expansion.
Yeah,
and the MTA needs a yard anyways. The reason we did not include in the yard because we are not yard planning experts on how much they would cost. That's why we focused mainly on like how to deliver the line first, because even under the current yard restraint situation, ETA has been pulling off some very smart operations in terms of like running the system 24 hours, storing the trains on express tracks, as bad as it might be, but the system is running. So the reason we did not consider yards is because we don't know where we should put it anyways.
In fairness, a lot of the plans that we excavated for the Laurelton had a yard on it. Actually a pretty big yard that they were going to put down there. And there are other places outside of Manhattan where it'd be pretty easy to site a yard. For instance, Well, one that they're thinking about in Manhattan was they basically want to put what is functionally a yard at the end of the cross town on the Q at 125th Street, where they're talking about it was something like 6 or 8 storage tracks, which is functionally a yard underground, which is one reason why their cost estimate is so much different than our cost estimate, because digging out space at 150 feet deep to store 8 trains is going to be really expensive.